You know that feeling when you finally track down a Holy Grail cartridge, pop it into your console, and instantly realize the game is an absolute, unplayable nightmare? Well, speaking as a retro game collector who has hunted down some seriously obscure hardware, let me tell you, almost nothing embodies that specific kind of pain quite like the game we're looking at today. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are dissecting a total oddity in the history of 8-bit platformers. We're talking about the time they tried cramming the beloved, perfectly tuned NES franchise Mega Man onto the tiny, cramped screen of the Sega Game Gear. Honestly, it's a tale of weird licensing, sheer frustration, and baffling design choices that will make literally any classic gaming fan wince. So let's just dive right into it. So what exactly happens when you take a British publisher and task them with squeezing an iconic Nintendo exclusive onto a handheld console with a microscopic screen? Well, the short answer is you get a game so incredibly claustrophobic that the developers actually had to invent awkward vertical scrolling just to make the standard levels somewhat playable. I mean, the Game Gear hardware simply wasn't built for the sweeping, precise platforming that the Blue Bomber is famous for. It was an impossible task from day one, and believe me, the resulting gameplay reflects that struggle the second you press start. Section 1. A bizarre Frankenstein origin. Now, this notoriously frustrating cartridge wasn't built from scratch. It was actually born from a really unexpected licensing agreement. And the geographical irony of this project is just astounding. Get this. To make this game a reality, a British company called US Gold was hired to publish it. They already had a history of sub-licensing Capcom titles for European PCs. US Gold then contracted the actual development out to a small, pretty unknown studio called Freestyle, which was also based in the United Kingdom. But look at that final column on the right. Despite being developed and published entirely in the UK, this Game Gear exclusive was bizarrely only ever released in North America. It's a collector's nightmare right out of the gate. And when Freestyle actually put the game together, they didn't even make a faithful remake of the original Mega Man. The game is actually the strange Frankenstein monster mashed together from previous NES classics. It borrows elements, enemies, and level designs heavily from Mega Man 4, Mega Man 5, and Mega Man 2. So it's not a new adventure at all. It's really just a recycled amalgamation of other, much better games squeezed down into a handheld format. Moving on to Section 2. The fatal screen crunch. Okay, this is where the game goes from being a weird historical anomaly to just a brutally frustrating experience. Let's define exactly what we are dealing with here. Screen crunch is when a game's field of view is severely reduced by a small screen, completely forcing the player into extremely tight quarters. Now, at first glance, the graphics actually look remarkably similar to the classic NES games, maybe even with a slightly wider variety of colors, but the absolute second you start moving, boom. The Game Gear's incredibly small screen slaps you right in the face. Freestyle was forced to awkwardly add vertical scrolling to levels that were originally designed for wide, horizontal CRT televisions, so you are constantly battling enemies in quarters so tight you barely have a fraction of a second to react. Section 3. Blind leaps and spikes. Listen, if you are a collector who actually plays your retro games, this is where the sheer agony really sets in. I want to walk you through the miserable, distinctly unfair sequence of platforming in this game. Step 1, you notice a pit, a drop-off in the level. Step 2, because the screen is so small, you have absolutely no idea what is below you, so you take a blind leap of faith into the abyss. And step 3, you land directly on a bed of spikes and die instantly, over and over again. You literally just have to memorize the falls through trial and agonizing error, because the hardware simply will not let you see the deadly traps waiting for you. It's maddening. Section 4. Nerfed mechanics. Small roster. As if the screen crunch wasn't bad enough, the frustrating hardware limits of the Game Gear entirely gutted Mega Man's core mechanics. Let's contrast the beloved classic NES mechanics with the insulting Game Gear nerfs. On the NES, Mega Man could famously fire 3 bullets on screen at once, which establishes a really satisfying rhythm to the combat. On the Game Gear, only 2 bullets on screen at once. It completely throws off your timing. Furthermore, the iconic Robot Master weapons were drained of all their charm. Defeat Bright Man on the NES, and you get the awesome Flash Stopper. Defeat him on the Game Gear, and you get the incredibly generic Bright Weapon. I mean, it just feels so lazy. And speaking of the Robot Masters, the content itself was severely slashed. As a collector, you boot up a Mega Man game expecting that iconic grid of 8 Robot Masters to choose from. It's part of the magic. But here, you only get 4 to start with. Stone Man, Maypole Man, Bright Man, and Star Man. That's half the starting roster, which means half the strategic fun of figuring out the boss weaknesses is just gone. The pacing of the game is honestly just as bizarre as its roster size. Phase 1 has you defeating those 4 starting masters we just talked about. Then, suddenly in Phase 2, you are ushered into fights with Wave Man and Toad Man, basically out of nowhere. And then finally, in Phase 3, you go straight up against Dr. Wily. It completely lacks the cohesive, satisfying progression that absolutely defined the original console games. Section 5. Rare and Expensive Nightmare. So, this is where we pivot from the punishing difficulty of the game itself to its paradoxically high value today. But before we talk price, I have to reveal the ultimate punishment for actually trying to play this cartridge. 0. Zip. Nada. That is the exact number of continues you get in this incredibly difficult, blindly unfair game. If you get a game over from missing a blind jump into spikes, you are completely out of luck. You are sent right back to the title screen. It is an absolutely brutal design choice. But wait, it actually gets worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. For true masochists, there is even a hard mode if you really want to torture yourself. It is a completely baffling inclusion. I mean, the developers acknowledged the brutal screen crunch, gave you 0 continues, and then somehow thought, you know what this game really needs? A harder difficulty setting. No way. Now, check out this number, 3.75 out of 5. That is the score GamePro magazine actually gave this game back when it was released. They claimed Mega Man fans would dig it. It really shows a massive critical disconnect between the reviewers at the time and the painful reality of playing the game. Perhaps they were just charmed by seeing a Nintendo icon on a Sega handheld, but they definitely glossed over the pure torture of actually playing it. All of this builds into its current, super baffling legacy. Time has not been kind to this game. Unlike the Wily Wars, which was a faithful 16-bit Sega Genesis compilation that still gets a lot of love today, this bizarre Game Gear port has never been re-released on any modern consoles or digital storefronts. It has been completely, almost intentionally, abandoned by modern game preservation efforts. And because it was never preserved digitally, tracking down an original, physical cartridge today is insanely expensive. Its sheer rarity, combined with the fact that it was only ever released in North America, makes it an incredibly pricey item strictly for hardcore collectors. It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? The worst game in the franchise is one of the most expensive to actually buy. Which leaves us with this final, lingering question. Is owning this expensive piece of Sega history actually worth the torture of playing it? As an explainer of the weird and wild history of gaming, I can tell you for sure that the paradox of retro collecting is very real. Sometimes we pay top dollar not for a masterpiece, but for a fascinating, completely unplayable disaster. What do you think? Does rarity equal value, even when the gameplay is an absolute nightmare? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Game Gear's most notorious port. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.